welcome. And in sharp focus today is our economy. And it's been brought into focus by the international ratings agencies such as Moody's that have given us downgrades. And I'm going to say it's not just South Africa, even the first world, France, etc., have also been downgraded. Such is the world that we're living in at the moment. But what does it mean for us? What can we do about it? When I get your thoughts and your questions on that and other issues ahead of the ANC's policy conference next week. And just before the break, we were having a conversation about confusing messages that are being sent out and whether we're on the right path or not and whether we can actually get the job done. So quick comments from our panelists. And also I'd just like to welcome the president of COSATU, Mr. Sedumo Dlamini, who's just joined us. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us and giving us an opportunity to share your thoughts with us. And I'll get a comment from you just now, but quick comment from you, Mr. Msmadi.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify the point on macroeconomic policy. It will be important that when we engage in these debates or discussions, panelists have taken an opportunity to read our documents. Because what I'm saying is in our documents. The Polokwane resolution and strategy and tactics says we reaffirm our economic policies they are, but we have not paid much attention and detail on the macroeconomic issues. So we need to do something in terms of looking or taking stock on macroeconomic policies so that when we go to the national conference, there are recommendations. We may as well say everything is fine. But the other point that I want to say is that there is no country which is aspiring to be a developmental in nature that will leave everything to the market and say, no strategic minerals. There's no such a thing. And I don't see anything wrong in us identifying certain mineral deposits in South Africa to say, this one, we think the state must play a greater role. It doesn't say the private sector will not invest, by the way. It doesn't say that.
All right.
It doesn't say that.
We're gonna unpack all of that, and I'm sure a few questions will come up. JP, just your comments on what you've heard so far, and then we'll get a comment from the president of COSATU.
I would like to say two things. The first one is we can absolutely agree with you that the country is a better place than what it was 20 years ago. The country is a better place than what it was 10 years ago. And we don't have to have an argument about it. You've got all the empirical evidence from the census. So there's no question, even a bad area like education, there are some development indicators showing that in some areas of education, we've progressed and we're better off than what we were 10 and 20 years ago. So that's not really the issue. I think I agree with you fully. We whip ourselves too much and we don't give enough recognition to ourselves for the progress made. We've made that progress. But I do sense among South Africans a big desire to do much better than what we're doing. I think the overwhelming majority of South Africans don't want to see a Marikana. They don't want to see the industrial unrest that we've seen in the last couple of 3-4 months. And perhaps most importantly, most overwhelmingly number of South Africans do not want to see the unemployment that we're having. Now, how do we get away from these issues? It is not good enough to say we've got a marvelous 20 years behind us and therefore the next 20 years will also be marvelous. We have to actively engage in creating that future. And there I think we must accept that we're letting the ball slip a bit. May I just point this out? The various government plans talk about growth in 6 sectors of the economy and jobs that will come from 6 sectors of the economy. Those 6 sectors is mining, agriculture, which includes land reform, manufacturing, the green economy, tourism and infrastructure. Where do we stand this morning? Well, the first 2, mining and agriculture, are not going to contribute to jobs over the next 20 years. They are not going to do it. The underlying trends in our economy is such that there's more mechanization, more capital intensity, higher level of skills, therefore higher wages. All of that is good. The counterpoint of all that, higher productivity, the counterpoint of that, fewer people employed. So of the 6 sectors that government itself has identified, 2 of them are not going to contribute. So we're down to 4. What is manufacturing going to do? If we assume that we do very good, very well in agro-processing, agricultural processing, and you count that under manufacturing, then manufacturing can probably tick along. But it's not going to be a game changer. We're not going to create 1 million jobs in manufacturing in the next 10 years. It's not on. So what are we left with now? Now we're left with 3 out of 6. And I think those 3 will do well. Infrastructure will do well, and you've pointed to the political commitment there, and I think that's very healthy and very good. The green economy will do well, and tourism we know are doing well. But we're down to 3 out of 6. And I think what most South Africans are saying, we want to do better than this. And that's where we have to find one another. There's something that concerns me more than policy. I think in 2 weeks' time, Peter, the ANC conference will be over, everybody will be back home, and there will probably be much more certainty than there is this morning. But the one thing that I'm skeptical that will not happen after Mangaung is that South Africans, i.e. the ANC on the one hand and the business sector on the other hand, are not finding each other. And what is the lesson that we learn on developmental states from Southeast Asia? We learn that if you want to have an effective developmental state, the business sector, the private sector, and government must be like that. It must be a relationship of unhealthy intimacy. Then you get economic results. We don't have such an unhealthy, intimate relationship here. Government doesn't trust business, business doesn't trust government. In that context, we're not going to progress. And I think that, to me, is the big thing we must tackle, not just a policy issue.
All right. And in between this unhealthy intimacy is Labour, the child of these 2 parents, perhaps.
Still sleeping in the bed.
So a great place to bring you in, Mr. Dlamini. Your thoughts ahead of this conference, as we're talking about the state of our economy, and Labour often is a victim in all of this. Decisions are being made either by government, either by the private sector, owners of business, and you're stuck in the middle, and yet this is where most of the pain is being felt.
Thank you very much, Peter, and good morning to the co-panelists and the listeners and the viewers. Look, clearly Mangaung is starting on Sunday. And we should not create an impression, because the question will be, will Mangaung change things? If the answer is yes or no, it should not be based on the fact that on Friday everything would have changed in South Africa. Otherwise, we'll be misleading South Africans. Mangaung is very key because, as my colleagues say here, of an unhealthy relationship between business and government. Sometimes Labour becomes the victim of such a relationship. If it's healthy, it becomes a victim. If it's unhealthy, we can become a victim also. So we take this opportunity as a very, very important opportunity in the history of our country, where we hope to see the policy trajectories that will be developed there. How are they going to be taking us forward? We are faced with a serious economic situation in our country, and we need to see the practicalization of this radical transformation that the African National Congress has come up with in June. We're going there quite positive that this is an opportunity. And I say, if we're gonna say we will still use the same policies as we have been all the time and hope to effect the radical transformation, no, we will be wrong. But we're going there quite positive. We'll throw our bit and we hope for the best of that.
All right, okay. At that point, let's go to our audience. Let's get a gauge of some of the thinking here, and also you at home, don't forget you can be participating in this particular conversation too. Let's go straight to table number 11, and Mr. Adama Dean from NEPAD. Table number 11, Adama Dean, if you could stand up and grab the microphone and pose your question. If it's for someone in particular, if you could just say their name first.
Yeah, good morning, my name is Adama Dean from NEPAD. I would like to direct my question to Mr. Dlamini, and it goes that given that regional integration is a very important goal for NEPAD, how do you see the outcome of regional integration being able to help South Africa, which needs to grow double-digit to address issues of youth employment and education. Thank you.
Okay. He pointed to you, but I'm going to ask Iraj as well afterwards, because that's a space that of yours as well.
Yes,
Yeah.
precisely, Peter, and I think the question is quite critical. NEPAD was a very important intervention in Africa and required that it had to fit itself into the policies of development that our countries, South Africa in particular, as the champion of NEPAD, needed to observe. And indeed, its aim would have been to address these key questions, the youth employment and business opportunities for our young people in Africa. It's going to be very critical. I think at some point it's getting stale. We have to say, how do we tap back into that intervention and put it in the equation?
All right. So, Raj, I know that, Pan-African Capital, this is what you do. Regional integration, we all say the right things, we sign off the right things, but I sometimes get a feeling that we get in our own way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. The fact is, however, we want to sugarcoat it, since the departure of President Mbeki, since 2009, NEPAD has been neglected. Not by the rest of Africa, but by South Africa. At the same time, the good news is that the rest of Africa is moving double, triple the rate of growth of South Africa. South Africa is no longer as important for Africa and sub-Saharan Africa as it used to be 10 years ago. We are now the poorest growing country in sub-Saharan Africa. And so sub-Saharan Africa says, look, you're growing a third of us and you still don't know what you want to do. You're still thinking through. We are growing in our infrastructure, in our integration, and in job creation. So I think we've been left behind. And it may be a good thing, because we were always pulled down by our poor neighborhood. Because of civil wars, because of poor economic growth, lack of jobs, people were coming to South Africa. Now the reverse is happening. South Africans are actually going north of Limpopo because job opportunities are there, both interesting enough for skill and unskilled, for our workers and for our farmers and so on and so forth. So I think as a nation, we really have a defining moment to say, why did we let it slip? We got to be, and Africa was looking forward to South Africa being the champion of integration. But we must learn from it. There's no point in beating ourselves, but there is every point in learning from our mistakes, not doing the same thing again. And let go and learn from our African neighbors. Learn from Tanzania, learn from Ghana, both in terms of how to do it and what not to do. So I'm excited by the growth and the fact that sub-Saharan Africa, which a mere 10 years ago was the basket case of global poverty, today is the fastest growing region, faster than Southeast Asia, faster than China, faster than India. That's the exciting part of what's happening in our region.
Are we paying attention to regional integration?
You know, what is important for me is to acknowledge, the fact that we are beginning to look for solutions in the continent. That's a very important development coming from you, that we should learn from our own brothers in the continent. Where else in the past, not so long ago, the perception would have been they would go the African way. So Africa is beginning to prove itself. And that is why ourselves will begin to say, in terms of regional integration, we are no more longer looking at developing growth or our economy in relation to the rest of the world, particularly West and Europe, but Africa, China, we are part of BRICS. Coming back to NEPAD, I think I agree with my colleague, the president of COSATU here. But what is also important is that NEPAD as a plan should not have been conceptualized as a plan for us to be funded by somebody else. Commitment by ourselves and the rest of the continent on that one. It is not declining, or it has not disappeared with the moving on of former President Thabo Mbeki. We have the first woman chair of the African Commission coming from South Africa, who has just been, by the way, day before yesterday, crowned, or she has been named the Women Renaissance Women of the Year. Very, very important development. Now, we shouldn't look at NEPAD in isolation to the intervention that we are doing in South Africa. One, the peace and stability that we've created in the DRC, in all parts of the continent. So that's part of NEPAD, by the way. So I just wanted to say the funding aspect of it and the industrialization of the economy in the continent should also be looked at in terms of our own. How do you mobilize resources to fund the plan so that we don't just...
I know you all want to say something, but I know Standard Bank's got quite a good footprint on the continent.
Yes,
So what is your perspective? And then we'll go back to the questions.
I'd like to agree with Iraj on South Africa's growth. I mean, we forecast growth to be around 2.3% for this year, which is very slow, which is compared to double-digit growth we're seeing in other African countries. So the South African economy is a drag to the African economy. Back onto the regionalism and regional trade, part of the 300 billion, Transnet 300 billion rand budget is freight development, rail development into Africa. And if we don't see the opportunities and you don't revive regional trade, then we'll be left behind. Another point I'd like to make is that with Europe slowing, the European economy slowing, and a lot of our exports go into that market, and we are struggling because of Europe, we're often asked, why don't we trade with Africa? And it's about time that we change, we reshift, or at least focus trade into African countries and rely less on Europe and even China, for that matter.
But I do think it's fair to say, Peter, that SADC is now the second biggest market for South African manufactured goods after Europe. So what you're asking for is precisely happening. I think there's more and more exports of goods and services, particularly manufactured goods, going into SADC. And of course, the more they grow and the more money there is, the more we benefit. I don't buy this argument, I must tell you, that you are the bad boy of the class simply because somebody else is getting a higher mark. I think that's a nonsense concept. You cannot tell me that Germany is a society in decline because the Chinese economy is growing faster and has overtaken it in size. Germany is a country that looks after its citizens very, very well. Thank you very much. China's got a long way to catch up. Now, the same here. The fact that Nigeria or Botswana or Ghana or Tanzania or Namibia or whoever is growing faster than South Africa, I don't see it as a threat. For me, it's wonderful.
Of course.
I think it's fantastic. But we sit here and we say to ourselves that we're a failure because they grow faster. I just don't buy that argument.
We're not growing.
No, that's not,
that's not what I was trying to say. What I was saying is that the fact that we are not growing at the same rate, and not at the same rate, in tandem with other African countries. We're not, we will not grow at 10%.
No, and so what?
But that we should be growing. And also we have
I may just say, I mean, I think the more important thing, never mind growth rates, but again, it comes back to that path. A lot of these economies are putting themselves on the right path once again.
Exactly.
They're rolling out the carpets for foreign investors. We're very schizophrenic about Africa. We've got projects right across the border, power stations, potential power stations, which we basically said, no, forget it, we're going to do our own thing. And yet they make a lot more economic sense than the ones that we're actually doing. So we're terribly schizophrenic. We like it, we don't like it, we integrate it, we're not integrated, and we just need to send a much more consistent message.
Okay, all right.
Peter, that's the critical thing.
Very quick comment, because we're going to get
Can I just say this? I think it is important to acknowledge and appreciate the growth rate that is happening within the continent. I think it's a plus for us in terms of dealing with many socioeconomic problems. But also we must also understand that from what base are these economies growing in relation to us?
Yes.
Secondly, to what extent are those economies integrated in the global arena? Yeah. South African economy is a very complex economy. It's part of an integral part of the global economy. So the impact of what happens, and that's the external shock that I spoke to earlier on, would have more bearing to South African economy than the rest of the continent. So it is important to mention that. Okay. The last point on Marikana. Yeah. I think as much as you said there should be a greater cooperation between government and business. I think the emphasis should be between labor and business.
Exactly. Agree. Agree.
Okay.
Our role is to place policy in place. To the extent to which you operate within those policies, please, I said to the chamber the other day, don't ask government to militarize the mining industry. Because in some instances, I do hear you saying, government, you're not playing an active role in terms of discipline in the mining sector. That's not what, we have got labor laws in this country that are very progressive. The extent to which you utilize those laws is the matter between labor and business.
Okay.
Please don't ask the ANC to come in and be a
The
referee.
laws must be they must be respected and enforced.
Mrs. Levin.
Peter, we need to strengthen the point. The state or government doesn't have to be a referee between business and labor. That what Baba Mfamad is saying is critical, but it should not be suggesting that the government must ensure that there is peace between the two. It can't be. This government has a practical intervention, developmental role to play too.
Yeah.
Of course,
All
at
right.
the moment, the debate is
Okay.
that there is
I'm
unhealthy
gonna have to
relationship
step
between
in there
government and
because
labor. That's the issue that
We
have
won't
to
get through all these questions. Let's go to table number 12, Kelvin Khadebe. Kelvin?
Good morning.
All right.
As has been mentioned, the name is Kelvin Gawa Khadebe. JP mentioned that only 3 of the identified areas are likely to create the jobs that we need, one of which is infrastructure. Now, given the credit downgrades that increase the cost of borrowing, how realistic is the idea that has been mentioned by some that we can use local capital, some of which is tied up in the JSE listed companies, to kickstart our economy in the infrastructure sector?
All right. Who's best placed to answer that? Can we use Dennis?
Yeah, look, I mean, the infrastructure plans on the table are over 3 trillion. As a matter of fact, I think they've just gone up to 4 trillion. That's an enormous amount of money. And the simple fact is that a lot of private sector funds are going to actually be needed, and not only South African funds, but also international funds. So it's entirely realistic if the right framework is put in place, which actually allows for private sector participation, not only in the funding, but in the actual delivery of those projects. It is completely unrealistic if it's just going to be government. One of the key messages that comes out from the rating agencies is that we're running out of fiscal space. In other words, we were in a very, very comfortable position a few years ago in 2008, 25% of GDP, debt to government ratio. And now we basically have used all that space, and consequently government has to look for other sources. So again, it really comes down to making sure that we got the right sort of fundamental policies on the table that attract investment from the private sector principally.
Okay, let's go straight back to the tables. Table number 7, Chamber of Mines, Mr. Veki Sibia.
Peggy Sibia, Chamber of Mines. And I would like to direct my question to Mr. Mufamadi. The mining industry, in my assessment, is one of the most transformed industries in the country. And pre-Marikana wage negotiations and levels, 59% of the platinum were either breaking even or making losses. Are you, when you get to Mangaung, as we hear from Kodongwana, going to further increase the unemployment by increasing more taxes to the most taxed sector of the economy?
Mr. Mufamadi, are you determined to increase unemployment?
Obviously. You know, in responding to colleague Becky, I think in our deliberations between the chamber and the ETC of the ANC, that matter you have raised, we have said it's a matter for consideration and deliberation. But I also want to say in the mining sector, let's not generalize and say there's crisis in the mining industry. Because if you look in the gold sector, there's more stability in that sector. The problems that we've experienced in the past few months is more in the platinum belt. And that must also tell you something else. No, don't check
Iron ore also. We had iron ore, we had coal.
I'm saying the catalyst of the problems started more in the platinum sector. And there's got a spiraling effect. It says there's something that needs to be done in terms of your bargaining system in there. Because all these issues boils down to wage disputes at the moment and socio-economic conditions of employees. That's what we're dealing with. It's not something that we can turn a blind eye. But most importantly, if we were to look into the role of municipalities and the mining industry, because the plans, the developmental plans of the municipalities do not talk to what the mining sector is coming to do in the area, because jointly, you don't have to open a new pit when you know that you are going to need 7,000 or 800 people, but without thinking where they're going to come from, without thinking how they're going to live, is an integrated development plan between the mining company and the local municipalities. That is very, very important that we need to look into those issues. Lastly, you know the mining sector in this country. I was speaking to the Chamber of Mines in Canada some few years ago, and I was trying to market South Africa about how good we are and all those things. The president of the chamber said to me, Mr. Mfamad, you are underselling your country. Do you know that in the whole continent, you are the only place where we can fly and land at OR Tambo and get into a car, drive straight to my mine without getting a second helicopter and an army to look after me when I land on the other side. So the infrastructure is there. We just have to get our things and our act together, not only government. And I'm saying it's business, labor, and government. We need to come together on those issues and iron out those problems. Otherwise, we'll lose the opportunity. I think the mining sector contributes almost to 40% of our own revenue generation, foreign earnings. Now, if we don't attend to this problem, the consequences are too dire to contemplate.
All right. The question is, are you going to increase taxes?
That's the issue. I have said, when we launched our policy discussion documents, we said everything is up for discussion. There's no holy cow.
So there could be
including
an increase in
employment.
taxes.
She's uncertainty.
And the challenges we have, there are three. It's unemployment, levels of inequality, and poverty.
All right. So
whatever will help us to deal with those issues.
And government
we'll
inefficiency. And government inefficiency. And corruption.
Oh, okay.
And abuse.
They're more than three.
Point and then we continue. Okay, Tavi first.
No, I was just saying they're more than
okay,
three.
you agree.
Yeah.
Look, there's something that South Africans are capable of doing more than any other things that they do. You know, South Africans can talk themselves so bad.
Yeah.
And talk their country so bad more than any other person who think we are bad somehow or the other. And I think it's very, very important to note that because if we don't, we'll sell ourselves out continuously and miss some of the good things that are happening. That's the point that Mufamad was making earlier. When I was sitting down there. But I'm coming into the point that say, indeed, at Mangaung there shall be no holy cows. We shall discuss that matter. We shall discuss the other matters too. We shall discuss all the issues, and that shouldn't be a trans match. So Peggy, you shouldn't be fearful of what is coming. Wait until you see and participate in the debate.
All right, okay. Let's go back to the tables. Table number 14 from the ESCOM leadership. I'm struggling to read your writing, but it looks like Keketso Ratsiani. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Table number 14.
Lost them.
Not there. All right. Okay. Okay, we'll come back to table number 14. Probably didn't recognize the way I said his name. All right, let's go to table number 9, Ralph Mateja. Ralph Mateja.
Thank you. My question goes to Mr. Dlamini, and also Dr. Bedian could help chip in on this one. In most cases, you often hear that the governing party is trying to gear South Africa towards a developmental state. And my sense is that each and every state is essentially a developmental state, and that doesn't amount to any substantive input or position on policy, in my view. But what I want to ask is, going to Mangaung, what exactly is likely to be substantive changes when it comes to policy position by the ANC? And also, most importantly, can you also help us to tell the difference between rhetorical shift and that substance shift in policy position of the ruling party? Thank you.
Wow. Okay, let's start with the definitions first. Rhetorical shift and substantive ones. And then can you give us clues, perhaps, of what might come out of Mangaung without giving away holy cows?
Look, some of these concepts come from you, and you want us to
explain them.
We are going to Mangaung emboldened by the fact that the African National Congress said in June, in the second phase of our transition into our democracy, there shall be a discussion, or there shall be radical transformation. It wasn't unpacked what it means, but we saw the ANC opening a platform, and it invites everybody, including yourself, come and make a contribution so that that practical, radical transformation is realized. COSATU goes there clear. You're not going to achieve that if you continue to use the same policies that have not succeeded in creating employment, in creating opportunities for the young men and women to access business, and many, many other things that we want to do. We are mindful of the fact that there is the new growth path that has been introduced. It's nowhere closer to where we want to be, but a positive element. People have been talking of the infrastructural development. How do we strengthen that? The EPAB 2, very, very important industrial strategy that has been introduced after many, many years in our country. How are we going there to strengthen those policy trajectories? So I'm not going to talk substantive rhetoric. I will say, let us see the outcome of Mangaung talking to the practical trajectory of this radical transformation.
All right, before we go to a break, I keep wondering, is a 5-year break too long? I mean, we shouldn't really be going into Mangaung with shocks that might come out of it. We should have been managing policy all the way along, and that maybe a policy conference is about tweaking rather than coming up with radical new ideas.
You know, tweaking is tinkering. And if we philosophize problems that we have, at this level, perhaps we can afford to do so, because recession doesn't mean a lot to do except the share price of whatever investment is. But if we really take into consideration the hardships of ordinary people in this country, levels of poverty, high levels of unemployment, the disparities or inequalities, we've got the highest Gini coefficient, one of the highest. Now, we can't, after having looked at these things and observing it, go to Mangaung and say, let's do rhetorical issues, Ralph. We can't. We are serious about what our people feels on the ground. We are very, very serious. And hence, if the macroeconomic policies that we have today are not helping us to address those problems, we have to attend to that.
But isn't a 5-year gap too late?
Now, the National Development Plan, which is a resolution of Polokwane, you know what I like is that we sometimes decouple events. The national plan is a resolution of the ANC in Polokwane to say we need a national plan, long term. What I think we should do in Mangaung is to say in the next 5 years, what are the things that we need to achieve? Because every country, developmental countries that I know, states, they do have 5 years. You go to China, they'll tell you in the next 5 to 10 years, this is what we're focusing on. And that's what I think we need to do. And there should be a buy-in by everybody. Business, labor, government, civil society. Because we cannot continue to play marbles with the lives and the hardships of our people.
Okay. We're going to leave it there for the time being. We're going to take a break, but after the break, we'll take more questions. But I would like you to think about this one. In the papers at the weekend, we saw CEOs come together and send out almost an SOS. You talk about government working together with business, but we've seen in the past that business leaders talk out. They get whipped, and they talk down, unpatriotic, whatever it is. I'll leave that thought with you, and perhaps we can look at that after the break, and we'll also go back to our table. So stay with us. If you have questions at home, please